Hi, my name is Goldie McAlvin, and I will be talking about task analysis instructional strategy. Task analysis is the process of breaking a skill into smaller, more manageable steps in order to teach the skill. As the smaller steps are mastered, the learner becomes increasingly independent. When the overall objective seems too broad, an educator can break down the process into segments of learning. This skill should not encompass multiple variables or altered outcomes. The first step for implementing task analysis is identify the targeted skill. The skill shouldn't be too simple and it should not be too complex. Too simple would be turning on a sink faucet. Too complex would be preparing, serving, and cleaning up dinner. There's too many variables, there's too many outcomes. Washing dishes would be a really good example of a targeted skill. There's finite steps, ultimately with the same outcome. The second step for implementing task analysis is to identify the prerequisite skill of the learner and the materials you're going to need to teach this task. Teachers can decide the present level by the learner's IEPs, from past data, just interacting with your student, whether or not the student's mastered these skills, whether they're ready to apply the next set of skills, and so on. This is also when the teacher is going to consider the textbook, the resources, all the materials you're going to need to actually teach the targeted goal for the student. The third step for implementing task analysis is to take the task and to separate it into a list of individual skills. High-level learners that have previously mastered skills are not going to need those included in the series of steps. Low-level learners are going to need a more detailed list of instructions. The teacher can definitely differentiate using just those two qualities. As far as high-level learners in their class would have a smaller list, and the low-level learners will have a more detailed list. Also, the teacher can differentiate depending upon the student's learning style. Written instructions. If your student is a non-reader, maybe those are going to be picture representations. Teachers can also just show a video modeling the task that they want the learner to achieve, or the teacher themselves can model it through demonstration and the learner can replicate it back to the teacher. A good example of task analysis is this one, setting the table. They take every individual step in setting the table and outline it into these skills. Puts down the placemat, places the large plate in the center of the placemat, puts the small plate in the upper left-hand side of the placemat, puts the butter knife on the small plate. We can see with this example that there's going to be a finite, definite outcome every single time going through this. The learner who is following this list is going to get the same outcome every time. It's very important. The fourth step in implementing task analysis is to confirm that the task is completely analyzed. Once you have your task analysis listed into skills, you're going to want to have somebody else carry out the instructions from an unbiased perspective. That way you can ensure that all the steps are accurate and easily interpreted. It's so easy just to leave out small steps that we take for granted. When the instructor receives the feedback, then they can go in and revise different components within the steps based on the feedback obtained through their trial to be able to communicate the best possible way. Next, the teacher will determine how the skill will be taught. The teacher will take a lot of things into consideration when choosing the best instructional strategy. For instance, the learner's temperament, their learning style, what's worked, what doesn't work for the learner in the past, and the learner's IEPs, and the environment in which the learner actually functions. The educator is also going to determine what type of assistance each of these skills will be receiving. That is the last step, implementing intervention and monitoring the progress. When teachers develop a plan for providing assistance, what they're doing is deciding what type of assistance they will be given throughout each individual step of the process. The highest level of assistance is going to be modeling, physically assisting the learner plus verbal prompting. So not only are they going to physically be doing it, they're also going to be explaining it verbally. Then as the learner develops skills, these assistants will fade. No longer will the teacher have to model and give a verbal prompt. Maybe the next day they only have to model. Eventually, maybe that step will be reduced to a verbal prompt. Maybe that step can be reduced to just a cue, just a look, maybe just something very small. And finally, the student will reach an independent level of that skill. Teachers also will choose how to properly collect the data for best visual interpretation. The data is a very important part of this process. Benefits of task analysis: students are able to celebrate small successes, achieving one skill at a time. Instead of a student being compared to the other learners within the classroom, especially students with disabilities, they are only in competition with themselves. Once they go from one skill of model plus verbal down to just a verbal prompt, they should be aware of that progress. Even though they haven't reached their ultimate end goal yet, they are still progressing, and that progress is very necessary in keeping the students' learning positive. So it definitely creates a supportive and encouraging learning environment. These students are going to receive differentiated assistance on skills they struggle with. So not only are they getting differentiated instruction, whether it be written, oral, pictures, video, but they're also going to be receiving the differentiated assistance on different skills through the physical, modeling, verbal prompts. Another benefit is the data. The data is so imperative. When the data is gathered and evaluated, it definitely helps not only the student, but it also helps the teacher. The teacher can determine exactly where the student is going to be needing the support. Where that student struggles is where the teacher is going to decide what kind of assistance she's going to offer. Maybe if he continues to struggle in that area, she can change the type of assistance. Teachers can also evaluate the data and on themselves. If their entire class is struggling on the same step, that would be a good indicator for the teacher to say, hey, maybe I haven't communicated that step clearly, and this is a good time for me to reevaluate that step, recommunicate, reteach that step to the entire class for best understanding. Some setbacks: task-based learning requires teachers to do so much more. Not only are you breaking it down into time-consuming individual tasks, but then you're going to have to get somebody else to go through that with you. You're constantly be going through the same thing over and over. to collect the data during the process, you're going to have to replicate that same analysis numerous times. Obviously, you're not going to teach that same lesson every single day. However, that's what task analysis needs. It needs you to follow through with that beginning to end result daily, over and over and over and over until that's finally mastered. And that's not something that's always feasible or that we have enough time in the class with the rest of the curriculum that needs to be covered. The data collection itself can be labor intensive. Not only are you collecting data on the different skills that they have mastered and not mastered, depending on how many skills there are in the list to reach the end goal, but then within each individual skill, you're given a degree of what kind of assistance. So in one skill, it has a higher degree of assistance, where tomorrow that same skill may have a less degree of assistance. With a different assistance that's measured, it can create a labor-intensive data collection. It may make it very difficult to compare if you have these on different graphs. Also, if the graph isn't exaggerated enough, these small advances throughout the process are going to be left unnoticed. The graphing system must be intricately detailed enough to display accurate progress, or it's pointless. Teachers in general or special education settings should just remember that collecting and graphing the student performance data is critical with this technique. The procedures typically used with students with more involved needs who learn at a slower rate than their peers. Therefore, the teachers need a method to monitor progress that uses a scale sensitive enough to detect the small student gains or when progress is not adequate, so that appropriate modifications can be made in the instructional approach. Not only can task analysis be used to teach academics, but it can also used to teach communication skills, life skills, social skills, vocational skills. However, it is said that the model works best when dealing with students with disabilities for behavior modification, because this is something that a teacher can work on all year long. The best thing about it for students with disabilities is that it does allow the student to eventually gain independence throughout their detailed list. They're able to see where they're progressing, even if it is at a slower rate than their peers, and that they will eventually be able to do it on their own and independently, which is the ultimate end result goal. So overall, I really enjoyed learning about task analysis. I felt like it was very good, something that we kind of do anyway, maybe not in such steps, maybe not as detailed, maybe not with the collection of the data. However, it is a very good teaching tool, allowing your learners to celebrate successful benchmarks as they work their way to the end result, just keeping the learning process positive and supportive, and ensuring an overall enjoyable learning experience, which I think that is all of our end goal. And I hope that you appreciated it as well.